Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The blade stopped an inch from Kalen's throat, held by a hand that trembled not from fear, but from a fever so high it radiated heat like an open furnace. "Don't go," the voice whimpered, a shattered, desperate sound that had no business coming from the throat of the man currently holding a dagger to his husband's jugular. Lord Lysander, the feared white ghost of the court, the man who had looked at Kalen with eyes like glacial ice only hours ago, now dropped the knife with a clatter. He collapsed forward, burying his flushed, sweat-drenched face into the crook of Kalen's neck, his legs failing him entirely. "Please, Kalen. The shadows are too loud. Hold me. Just hold me until the burning stops." General Kalen Thorne was a man carved from granite and scarred by the harsh winds of the northern border. He understood the language of steel, the geometry of war, and the brutal honesty of a battlefield death. He did not, however, understand the treacherous, silken web of the imperial capital, and he certainly did not understand the creature he had been forced to marry. The union was a command from the emperor, a transparent political maneuver to shackle the empire's most beloved war hero to its most controversial aristocratic family. The Valerius line was ancient, wealthy, and rumored to be cursed. And the current head, Duke Lysander Valerius, was the epitome of that decay. Kalen remembered their first meeting in the grand, drafty hall of the Valerius estate. Lysander sat in a wheelchair made of ebony and silver, a blanket of white fur draped over his lap. He was devastatingly beautiful, with hair the color of moonlight and skin so pale the blue veins beneath looked like cracks in porcelain. But his eyes were dead things. Cold, dismissive, and utterly devoid of warmth. "So," Lysander had said, coughing slightly into a lace handkerchief that came away spotted with blood. "The Emperor sends me his favorite dog to guard the invalid. Do try not to bark too loudly, General. My constitution is fragile." That had been 3 months ago. Since then, their marriage had been a study in icy politeness. They slept in separate wings of the sprawling, Gothic manor. They ate breakfast in silence at opposite ends of a 30-foot table. Lysander was a ghost in his own home, rarely seen, always surrounded by the cloying scent of bitter medicinal herbs. He was sharp-tongued, arrogant, and physically pathetic. Or so Kalen thought. The change began on the night of the red moon equinox. The manor felt oppressive, the air pressure dropping until Kalen's ears popped. He had retired to his chambers early, exhausted from a day of drilling the house guard, when his door creaked open. Kalen's hand was on the hilt of the sword by his bedside before the door was fully ajar. But it wasn't an assassin. It was Lysander. The Duke was standing, unsteady, swaying like a reed in a gale, but standing. He wore only a thin silk nightshirt that clung to his emaciated frame, translucent with sweat. His feet were bare against the cold stone floor. "Lysander." Kalen lowered the weapon, confusion warring with instinct. "Where is your chair? What is wrong?" Lysander didn't answer. He stumbled forward, his breathing ragged and wet. His eyes, usually sharp and guarded, were blown wide, the pupils dilated until the iris was swallowed by black pools of need. He looked less like a haughty aristocrat and more like a drowning man seeing a piece of driftwood. Kalen moved to intercept him before he fell. "You're burning up," Kalen growled, his large hands gripping Lysander's shoulders. The heat coming off the smaller man was alarming. "I'll call the physician." "No," Lysander gasped, his grip surprisingly strong as his fingers dug into Kalen's forearms. "No doctors. No needles. Just you." Before Kalen could process the absurdity of the request, Lysander collapsed against him. The Duke, who flinched if their sleeves brushed in the hallway, now wrapped his arms around Kalen's waist, burying his face in the rough cotton of Kalen's tunic. He inhaled deeply, a shudder racking his entire body. "Warm," Lysander murmured, his voice thick with a sweetness Kalen had never heard. He rubbed his cheek against Kalen's chest like a cat claiming territory. "You smell like iron and rain. It quiets the noise." Kalen stood frozen, his arms hovering awkwardly. This was the man who had sneered at Kalen's peasant stench a week ago. "Lysander, you are delirious. Let me take you back to your room." "No back," Lysander whined, a petulant, childish sound. He looked up, tears shimmering in his dark eyes. Don't send me to the cold place. It hurts there. Stay here. With husband. Husband. The word hit Kalen like a physical blow. Lysander had never called him that. It was always General or Thorn. With a sigh of resignation, Kalen scooped the lighter man up into his arms. Lysander weighed nothing, a collection of hollow bones and feverish heat. He immediately curled into Kalen, tucking his head under Kalen's chin, humming a soft, contented sound that vibrated against Kalen's collarbone. Kalen carried him to the large four-poster bed. He intended to deposit the Duke and retreat to the armchair. But the moment Lysander's back touched the mattress, he let out a keen of distress and latched onto Kalen's wrist with a vice-like grip. Don't leave, Lysander pleaded, his eyes terrified. Please, Kalen. The monsters come when I'm alone. Just lie down. Please. It was the vulnerability that broke Kalen's resolve. He was a protector by nature. He could not walk away from something so defenseless. Fine, Kalen grunted. He removed his boots and lay on top of the covers, keeping a respectful distance. It didn't last. Within seconds, Lysander had rolled over, plastering himself against Kalen's side. He threw a leg over Kalen's thighs and draped an arm across his chest, snuggling closer until there was no air between them. Safe, Lysander whispered into Kalen's neck, his hot breath ghosting over the sensitive skin. My big, strong general. Kalen lay awake for hours, staring at the canopy, listening to the slow, steady heartbeat of the man clinging to him. He felt a strange tightening in his chest, a protective instinct he hadn't realized he possessed for this specific person. Eventually, the rhythm of Lysander's breathing lulled him into a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning sunlight slashed through the heavy velvet curtains. Kalen woke to the sensation of emptiness. He blinked, reaching out instinctively to the space beside him. The sheets were cold. He sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and saw Lysander sitting in the armchair by the window. The Duke was fully dressed in a high-collared coat of midnight blue velvet. His hair was impeccably brushed, his posture rigid. The wheelchair was nowhere in sight, but a cane rested against his knee. Lysander. Kalen's voice was rough with sleep. How are you feeling? The fever. Lysander turned. The look on his face could have frozen magma. His eyes were clear, sharp, and utterly devoid of the previous night's softness. General Thorn, Lysander said, his voice clipped and precise. Would you care to explain why I woke up in your bed, entangled in your limbs like a common harlot? Kalen blinked, stunned. You came to me. Last night. You were burning with fever. You begged me not to leave you. Lysander's lip curled in a sneer. Don't be ridiculous. I have a chronic constitution, General, not a penchant for melodrama. I would never lower myself to beg for your attention. You called me husband, Kalen said, his voice rising. You wouldn't let go of my hand. You said I smelled like iron and rain. A flicker of something, fear? Panic? Crossed Lysander's face, but it was gone so fast Kalen thought he imagined it. Lysander stood up, leaning heavily on his cane, his knuckles white. You have an overactive imagination, likely a side effect of your time in the barbaric north, Lysander spat. I likely sleepwalked in a fugue state induced by my medication. Whatever occurred was a physiological error, not an expression of affection. Do not mistake my illness for interest. He limped toward the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. Speak of this to no one. I will not have my reputation tarnished by your fantasies. The door slammed shut, leaving Kalen alone in the silence. He looked at his hand, the one Lysander had clung to so desperately, and felt a surge of anger. But beneath the anger was confusion. The man last night had been terrified. The man this morning was terrified, too, but he was hiding it behind a wall of ice. The pattern repeated 3 times over the next month. Always at night. Always when the weather turned foul or the moon was full. Lysander would appear, feverish and trembling, stripping away his armor of arrogance to reveal a raw, needy creature who craved Kalen's touch like oxygen. He would cry if Kalen pulled away. He would kiss Kalen's palms, his scars, murmuring praises and endearments that made Kalen's heart hammer against his ribs. And every morning, the denial. I don't know what you're talking about. You are delusional. Don't touch me. It was maddening. Kalen felt like he was married to two different men. He began to research the Valerius line, digging into the dusty archives of the family library. He found references to a blood curse, dating back 300 years, a surplus of spiritual energy that burned through the host's body like a slow fire. The texts mentioned that the excess energy caused dissociative fugues and regression to primal instincts. It wasn't that Lysander was lying. It was that the vessel couldn't contain the storm. The breaking point came during the winter solstice ball. The Valerius manor was filled with the elite of the empire. The air smelled of expensive perfume, roasted meats, and deception. Lysander was in his wheelchair, playing the role of the invalid host perfectly. He wore white silk and diamonds, looking ethereal and untouchable. Kalen stood by his side, his hand resting on the back of the chair, his eyes scanning the crowd for threats. The tension between them was palpable. Only that morning, Kalen had woken up with Lysander's head on his chest, only to be dismissed with a scathing remark about boundaries over breakfast. "You're gripping the chair too hard, General," Lysander murmured, smiling for the passing guests but speaking through gritted teeth. "You'll snap the wood." "Maybe I'm imagining it," Kalen retorted dryly. "Like I imagine everything else." Lysander stiffened, his jaw tightening. Before he could respond, the glass dome of the ballroom ceiling shattered. Assassins dropped from the rafters like black rain. Screams erupted. The crowd surged in panic. Kalen moved instantly, drawing his ceremonial sword. "Secure the Duke," he roared to his guards, kicking a table over to create a barricade. 3 assassins lunged for Lysander. Kalen intercepted 2, his blade singing through the air, severing limbs and steel alike. But the third slipped past, a dagger aimed straight for Lysander's heart. "Lysander!" Kalen screamed, too far away to stop the blow. But the blow never landed. Lysander didn't cower. He didn't scream. He simply stood up from the wheelchair. The air in the ballroom suddenly grew heavy, vibrating with a low, terrifying hum. Lysander raised a hand, his pale fingers splayed. A shock wave of pure, white energy erupted from his palm. The assassin didn't just die, he disintegrated. Flesh and bone turned to dust in an instant, blown away by a wind that originated from the invalid Duke. The entire room froze. Lysander stood amidst the chaos, his eyes glowing with an eerie luminescence. But he wasn't looking at the assassins. He was looking at his own hands, trembling violently. "Too much," Lysander whispered, his voice echoing unnaturally. "It's too much." Blood began to pour from his nose. The curse was flaring, triggered by the adrenaline. The protective mental walls were crumbling. Another group of assassins, realizing the target was dangerous, rushed him all at once. "Stay back," Kalen roared, fighting his way through the melee. Lysander let out a ragged scream, and the energy exploded outward. It wasn't a controlled strike, it was a wild, feral release. The shockwave threw grown men across the room like ragdolls. The marble floor cracked. Lysander collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest. "Kalen!" he shrieked, the voice of the arrogant Duke gone, replaced by the terrified, needy creature of the nights. "Kalen, it burns. Make it stop." He was clawing at his own throat, as if trying to tear the power out. The energy was consuming him, turning his veins black. Kalen vaulted over the debris, sliding to his knees beside his husband. The energy coming off Lysander was scorching, blistering Kalen's skin, but he didn't care. He grabbed Lysander's wrists, pinning them down. "Look at me," Kalen commanded. "It hurts." Lysander sobbed, his eyes rolling back. "I'm going to explode. I'm going to kill everyone. Run, Kalen. Run away from the monster." "I'm not running anywhere," Kalen growled. He did the only thing he could think of to ground the surge. He pulled Lysander close and crashed his lips onto the Duke's. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a desperate seal. The effect was instantaneous. The wild, thrashing energy found a conduit. It poured from Lysander into Kalen, grounding itself in Kalen's immense physical fortitude. Kalen felt like he'd been struck by lightning, his muscles locking up, his vision widening, but he held on. He wrapped his arms around Lysander, crushing him against his chest, absorbing the overflow that was killing his husband. Slowly, the glowing light faded. The wind died down. The cracks in the floor stopped spreading. Lysander went limp in his arms, gasping for air, the black lines in his veins receding. The ballroom was silent, save for the whimpering of the injured and the settling of dust. Lysander pulled back an inch, his eyes wide, terrified, and lucid. He looked at Kaelin, then at the destruction around them, and then back at Kaelin. The mask was shattered. There was no room for denial now. You, Lysander rasped, blood staining his teeth. You didn't run. I told you, Kaelin said, wiping the blood from under Lysander's nose with his thumb. I don't abandon my own. Lysander's face crumpled. The arrogance, the coldness, the walls, they all collapsed. He buried his face in Kaelin's shoulder, right there in front of the wreckage of high society, and began to weep. Not the silent, dignified tears of a martyr, but the ugly, shaking sobs of a man who had been holding the sky up for too long. I'm sorry, Lysander choked out, clinging to Kaelin's lapels so hard his knuckles turned blue. I'm so sorry. I lied. I remember everything. Kaelin stroked the back of Lysander's head, glaring at anyone who dared to approach them. I know, Kaelin murmured. Why? Because if I admit I need you, Lysander whispered into the fabric of Kaelin's blood-stained tunic, then I am weak. And if I am weak, they will kill me. Or worse, you will see me as a burden and leave. You are the most dangerous thing in this room, Lysander, Kaelin said softly. And I have never been afraid of a burden. Kaelin stood up, lifting Lysander effortlessly into his arms. The Duke didn't protest. He didn't ask for his cane. He didn't ask for his chair. He curled his legs around Kaelin's waist and hid his face in Kaelin's neck, reclaiming the sanctuary he had only ever dared to take in the dark. Kaelin looked at the royal guards storming into the room. The assassination attempt has been thwarted, he announced, his voice booming with the authority of a general. The Duke requires rest. Anyone who disturbs us will answer to my blade. He turned and carried his husband out of the ruins, not toward the separate wings, but toward the master chambers. Later, in the quiet of the room, Lysander lay propped up against the pillows. The fever was gone, the curse stabilized by Kaelin's grounding presence. Kaelin sat on the edge of the bed, bandaging a cut on his own arm. It wasn't sleepwalking, Lysander said softly into the silence. Kaelin didn't look up. I know. The curse. It fractures the mind, Lysander explained, his fingers nervously twisting the sheets. When the energy gets too high, the rational part of me shuts down. The primal part takes over. The part that only knows survival. It seeks heat. It seeks safety. It seeks you. And the morning? Kaelin asked, finally meeting his eyes. Shame, Lysander admitted, looking down. Humiliation. To be the white ghost by day and a clinging child by night. I couldn't reconcile them. I thought if I denied it, I could keep you at a distance. If I kept you distant, you wouldn't see how broken I am. Kaelin finished the bandage and reached out, taking Lysander's hand. He interlaced their fingers. You aren't broken, Lysander. You're containing a storm. Even the strongest mountain needs a foundation. Kaelin brought Lysander's knuckles to his lips. You don't have to lie anymore. If you need me, you take me. Day or night. In private or in public. I am your husband. I am your ground. Lysander looked at him, eyes wet, searching for any sign of deception. Finding none, a genuine, small smile touched his lips, the first real smile Kaelin had ever seen. Acts clingy and cute. Lysander muttered, a faint blush rising on his pale cheeks. You must think me pathetic. I think, Kaelin said, leaning in to kiss his forehead, that I prefer the clingy version. Though I could do without the death threats before coffee. Lysander laughed, a rusty, beautiful sound. He pulled on Kaelin's hand, dragging him down onto the bed. Then come here, General. And don't you dare let go. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. Not with poison, but with the terrifying honesty of need. If you enjoyed seeing the icy Duke melt for his general, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a husband who pretended to forget your intimacy to save his pride? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then.